welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable. Today we are talking about why writers struggle with creating characters. Who wants to start us off? Any personal struggles with character development?
Where do we start?
I know, right? Yeah, it's a big topic,
problems.
Isn't it?
So many problems I have. No.
Yes. So what's harder, a protagonist or a supporting character? Or an antagonist? Who's hardest to develop?
Antagonists always get me.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I always leave them till the end, and I always wait and like, oh, it's just the spooky bad guy over here. He is, he's very mysterious and sinister. And then I actually have to figure out why he's mysterious and sinister. And
Right, because at the end of the day, the silhouette with the black hat just really doesn't actually create a good villain.
Not a good character. I guess it's a good place to start, but it's not a full character.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's developing all of that motivation and the backstory that always gets me. I'm always like, they just do it because they do it. And then it's like, no, that's not good enough. And so, especially for antagonists, having that reason is the hardest part for me because I have to take 7 steps backwards in order to get to what really is the core of their person. And the same goes for protagonists and supporting characters. It's like having those motivations is the hardest part for me. Really digging in deep.
That's interesting, Kathryn. I think writers start with the protagonist because that's our point of view and the story is about this person moving through struggles. That's where we develop our character arc. And then you plunk in this villain who exists to be an obstacle to the protagonist.
Right.
And that's just doesn't really work. It's fine to be an obstacle, but it has to be an obstacle with purpose and motivation and free will and drive. So in other words, it has to be as much of a fully formed character as the protagonist in order to really function well in a story.
Right. Yeah. And maybe it's harder to get to know them too because you're not usually not in their point of view. I know there are definitely exceptions to the rule, like Ken Follett's Eye of the Needle. He does like 50% protagonist, 50% antagonist, and they're both presented as completely believable, fully fleshed out characters. And so, but I think most books are written from just the protagonist point of view or the multiple protagonist point of view, and the bad guys, you never really get to see it through their eyes. And so since the writer spends all this time in their hero's body, but none of the time in their antagonist's body, when they actually get to the point where they have to develop them and make them do things, they're like, oh, I don't actually know this person. I don't know who they are because I've never spent any time with them.
Right. Well, a lot of writers, I am seeing that a lot of writers put in an antagonist point of view, but they do it for the wrong reason. They do it because they want to show that stakes are increasing for the protagonist, but this actually backfires because then the antagonist broadcasts what he's going to do to the protagonist, so it ruins your suspense and the surprise when the action actually hits the protagonist. The protagonist is like, and the reader's like, yeah, well, you told me it was coming, Right. So, if you want to give your antagonist a point of view, you have to have a reason besides sorting out your plot on the page in front of the reader. That will, you might as well just cut yourself off at the knees or type one-handed. It's no good.
You don't want that bad guy monologue where they're, telling you their whole plan.
Right, yeah. It always makes me think of the cartoon villain tying the lady to the train tracks with the mustache. Going like this.
Exactly, as the hand rubbing. I got you now. This is exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah.
Right. Yep. So what is a good reason for giving an antagonist a point of view? I know I've already talked about why I give my antagonists a point of view in the Scott Call series, so I'll let you guys go first.
Well, I've never done it personally, but I guess if you want them to, if you want readers to question who's right and who's wrong, like if it's really about perspective on the core truth, then that could be a good reason. Like if that was part of your theme, that could work really well. I think that the book I mentioned earlier, Ken Follett did it because it was about a World War II spy from the German side, and then it was about the Allies' side, so he was showing both sides of the war and how they both thought that they were doing a good thing or they both thought they were doing
interesting.
the just thing, the moral thing.
Yeah.
The spy was there because his Führer sent him, and that was, the leader of their country, and he thought that it was a just war because he didn't know about all the war crimes. And, same thing with the Allies. Of course, they thought they were just too.
Absolutely. I don't know where I first heard this, but someone said, nobody ever thinks they're actually a bad person, no matter how awful they are. It's like we're incapable of conceiving of ourselves that way. And I was watching Indian Summers. It's a BBC masterpiece drama about set in India in like 1932 or I think 32. And there's this female character, a British docent who runs the social club, and I'm watching her and I'm like, you're so conniving, you're so mean, you're so manipulative, you're bitch, And then she has this scene where she's talking, she's classist, she's racist, she's like all the worst of it, but she runs a social club with all of these, she calls them the natives, with all of these native staff members, and one of them, her right-hand man, she's saying to him, I've never hurt anybody. I just try to do what's best. And it's like shocking as the viewer to juxtapose my opinion of her with her own opinion of herself. But it really drives home the point as a writer that when you're creating your villain, you've got to keep in mind that your villain doesn't see herself as a villain. You need to create a complex person who can justify her own motivations.
Exactly. Because we all seek to do that in our own minds. Every action that we have is justified to ourselves. And so that's another reason to give them a point of view, is to show their justification, to give you a little bit of empathy, a little bit of that compassion, so that, like Matt said, like you can complicate things because it's like, wait a second, they have a valid point, but we're following the hero. And so you can have that kind of interplay and that conflict that's deeper than just physical confrontation. You can have that emotional, moral, ethical dilemma as well as a reader, seeing both points of view.
Yeah, definitely. So bringing two points of view to a story, especially morally ambiguous points of view, is a good reason to give an antagonist a POV.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Well, just on how or why writers struggle with character, I think just the motivations of anybody is hard to really get at. Like, you have to dig to find it. So a lot of the work I spend doing when I'm writing a book, if I get stuck, it's just trying to find what their real motivation is, because I don't always know it going into it. So with secondary characters, especially if they're just there to support, the protagonist, or provide some comedy relief or whatever their role is in that scene, like they're not just the comedy relief, they actually have a motivation for being there and a motivation for helping them, and working to find that is sometimes it feels like wasted effort because you're journaling through it or trying to figure out what it is, and you spend all this time, and it doesn't actually go on the page, but it's all really important to make it seem believable.
Yeah, definitely. Every character needs a motivation if they've got a name and dialogue. If they're interacting with your protagonist, it's good to know, what does this character get out of this exchange? Why is that character there? In The Murder in Skog Hall, I've got Tyler and Beckett's employee helping Jess move a potbelly stove into her house and brick a hearth in for her. And, Beckett's being a nice guy, and he's interested in Jess. Tyler has already established kind of a romantic connection with Jess, and so you have these two men, and what do they want out of it? Well, they both want something from Jess, but then the tension is actually between them because it sets up a rivalry between them. And if I didn't examine why would they be there, why would they be helping her with this really tedious chore with, sweaty physical labor, I wouldn't have been able to create that rivalry and make it believable.
Right. I think that's my biggest, but that's true though, because like it's easy to say these are the pieces that I need. These are the characters that I need in this scene. And it's not easy to say, and this is why. Each of them is there. And as soon as you put in a supporting character or even an antagonist or a protagonist even into a scene where they don't really need to be there, they don't want to be there, they're going to fall flat. Even if you force them to say what you want them to say or do what you want them to do, the reader's going to be like, sure.
Right.
Okay. Like you just did that for the plot. Like I do that in movies and books all the time where I'm like, that was just so that could happen. Like there was no reason for that. That was purely a plot move on the point, and that's frustrating as a reader. It bounces you out. You're like, oh, wait a second. Oh, right. Yes. Because of the story, it's all just to make me get to this point. So it's important to really get those nailed down.
Yeah, it is. If you don't nail it down, you create cardboard dialogue, and then it reads like the author is talking to the reader instead of characters are talking to characters. They aren't speaking naturally. They aren't saying things that would really flow out of their mouths. It's like, oh, here's some information you need. And it just, falls totally flat on the page. And so when you create scenarios for characters, make certain that it all gels with really compelling reasons for people to come together.
And if they have good reasons, when you put them in the same room, the dialogue will come easier to you, right? Because you'll know, like, oh, this is what this person is thinking right now. And it comes faster that way. Whereas if you put them in the room and neither of them know why they're there, you're just... Right. I guess that's what you call writer's block sometimes, right? You're like, oh, I don't know what they're going to say to each other. I never thought about it, but sometimes you just do it and see what happens, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah,
which is another thing I think that why writers struggle with characters, because they don't put in the work in the front. And so they get to that scene and they're 75% through their manuscript and they're like, wait a second, I don't even have enough backstory to make this work. I don't know why they're there. And then they have to go back and do so much more work backfilling all of this information, which is why characters are so tough, because you have to put in that work before you even get there in order to make it flow correctly and in a way that will draw the readers in and keep them there. So
right. Although sometimes the answer is actually more simple and straightforward than backstory. Like looking at motivation. If I said, okay, I need Beckett and Tyler to have a romantic rivalry over Jess, well, they could bump into each other in the hardware store. They could bump into, like there's so many ways they could encounter each other. But if you think about escalating a situation, they aren't going to just have a rivalry on the street. It's not like shootout at high noon, right? You avoid people in those situations. They would focus on being with Jess and avoiding each other. But because Jess, the one in the middle, needed something that required brawn, big muscle, she asked for a favor and they both responded, and then that put them in each other's company for hours. It wasn't like moving a couch for 40 minutes. This was bricking in a hearth and moving in a stove, and like I have Jess in the yard cleaning the potbelly stove and the guys are in the house laying bricks, and then Beckett's mad at Tyler because he's not doing the mortar right, or so you can totally see how this tension would explode in real life because they're just irritating each other, and Jess isn't there to buffer it. She's in the yard. So sometimes it really is just as simple as like, what would really drive these characters one together and two apart into that conflict.
It's to Kathryn's point about putting in the work ahead of time. Like I'm sure you did character sketches and you thought about this stuff beforehand, right? Like while you were developing it, right?
Yes.
Those
absolutely.
sorts of tools are really useful.
Right. So the work beforehand was knowing who's Beckett, who's Tyler, how do they relate to Jess. So that is the character development work. And then when you go to put it on the page, it's how do I get them together? What's going to feel natural and not cardboard? How am I going to make this flow in a way that's dynamic and leads to the outcome I want, which is the,
Right.
Which is the conflict and
the conflict.
tension.
Right. Yeah. but I absolutely had to develop their personalities before I could put them into that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You looked thoughtful.
I guess I was just looking thoughtful.
I was waiting. I was like, what's coming?
Just considering what you said, how it relates to what I'm working on now. So, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always so much gold in these, and I'm always like, oh, now I have to go back to the drawing board, or now I have to fix this, or now I'm going to think about this next scene I write or whatnot, and getting that personality on the page and such.
I was thinking about character sketches and how I started using them, and once I started using them for what they were meant to be used for, I was like, oh, this is why people use these. It's so much easier if you do it ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Develop your character first. Mm-hmm. Do either of you want to share any of your current struggles with character?
Oh, we already talked about mine with the antagonists. We can go past that.
Okay. Okay. So, antagonists are hard.
Yeah.
Hard.
Yep. Is there anything particular with protagonists that is a major pitfall you've identified?
Oh man, I always create the perfect protagonist.
Mm.
Always create the perfect protagonist. They're always super competent in all the right areas. So they're not just competent, they're competent in every way that I need them to be competent. And they don't have any of those flaws that you really need to get that character arc. And so I'm always like struggling to be like, wait a second, why isn't this working? Oh yeah, I can't just have her fix everything. She can't be super wise. Like, she can't have the perfect pat answer that person really wanted to hear. Like, there has to be that flaw that draws the conflict out. And I'm just really good. I want to make my characters great. I want them to be the best person they can be at the beginning.
See, that's it.
Yeah.
There's the problem.
Exactly. And
Yes.
That's funny.
that's my biggest struggle is working. I always start with that picture and then I have to work backwards and say, okay,
Right.
but how would she have gotten that? And how would she have gotten that? And let's move it backwards and backwards and backwards. And then we'll start there.
Right.
But yeah, getting that character that has no flaws, which makes them uninteresting. I mean, let's be real. But that's always the person that I start with in my head.
Yeah, that's a good point. You need to have a flawed character or a character who's not really well equipped to handle everything that's coming in the story at the beginning of the book in order to show the struggle and the growth that creates the character arc, that creates the new person, the changed person at the end of the book. That's the whole point of a character arc.
Right.
So next time you have a great idea, just say to yourself, this is the end.
Right.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And I have the opposite problem. Mine usually start like just as normal people or a little bit flat, and I have to like build them up, and then I have to say like, oh, well, it would have been useful if I had built that in from the beginning, and then I have to go back in and backfill it because I don't know how it's going to end. I never start with the perfect character. I start with somebody who's a little bit flat, and I have to build them up.
Are you finding you can figure out the build-up part of it when you do the character sketches at the beginning now, or do you have to kind of do a draft and then go back?
I'm definitely getting better. I'm learning how to fill it and how a character would develop and where I want them to be at the end, like thinking about that ahead of time. I've not historically been very good at that, and then I have to think like, oh, okay, well, how did they change? So like a lot of the times is because a lot of my stories are very plot driven, I'll get to the end and they'll have completed the plot, but they haven't changed internally as a character, and then I have to go through in a revision and build that in, which, if you recognize that, you know that's going to happen, you can kind of plan for it. So I think I don't know if I'm getting better at writing the characters. I'm getting better at planning and knowing how to fix the things that I always screw up. So maybe it's just like noticing my own weak spots.
Yeah, either way, it's a great thing because it's a time saver. And
Right. And my character sketches have developed over time too. They're more complex now, and they, like you've seen a lot of those character sketches where they come with just a list of 50 questions. or setting sketches are the same. They'll come with like season, time, weather, is it raining? And you're just like, I don't know if that's useful. And I've found things that I've found on lists of character sketches or whatever tool I found in whatever writing book I was reading at the time. And some of them I could take and throw half of it away.
Right.
Is that it's helped me narrow it down. So, I really focus on motivations and backstory, and on the flaw and also how they're going to change. Like, what's their arc going to be? If I know what their arc is ahead of time and I know how they're going to change as a person in this book, or how their relationship with another character is going to be different at the end than it is at the beginning.
Right.
I can build that into the sketches, and it makes writing the story much easier.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I find that I have to do it journaling longhand. If I don't, I can't sit in front of a bunch of questions and fill it.
Yeah.
That is not the way my brain works at all.
I have yet to meet a writer whose brain works that way.
I know, right?
I see these sketches all the time. 100 questions to help you flesh out your character. 50 questions, whatever it is. I don't know anybody who works like that, though.
No.
Where are the writers?
I don't know. It's all in a journal. And it's all...
Exactly.
I sit down and I just write whatever is occurring to me. So it ends up being like, I have this idea about a character, but that leads me to how she's going to relate to the antagonist, which leads me to a plot idea. So it ends up kind of all being together in these generative chunks of whatever I'm thinking about, So to actually sort it out into those questions, that minutiae doesn't really work for me. I need much more of a free flow. This leads to this, and then
you can see my revelation happen as you're reading through my journals, where I'm like, I don't really know how this is how this is gonna happen. There's a distinct shift. It's really fun. And my handwriting changes because I'm writing faster. And,
right. Yeah, it's like you fell into that hole.
Yeah,
exactly.
Start annotating the margins with exclamation points
and stars. And make sure you're reading this, and this is important. Yeah, exactly.
Those are always funny when you read back on them. You're like, why are there 10 exclamation points there? I don't think I should have been that excited about that, but okay.
Well, that's a dumb idea, really. Did I love that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Or by the time you finish the book and you're so far away from the journal, you go back and it's like, that didn't make it in. Nope. Nope.
That's all the stuff you use for bonus material later, right? You're like, original character sketch.
Right, yeah. No, my journals are going to the Smithsonian after I die. They'll be encased
and no
in
one is seeing them while I'm alive.
That's right, yeah. Well, no one's interested in them yet, but just wait.
I'm just too embarrassed to
Mark
anyway.
your words there. Yeah.
Posthumously, I'm going to be huge.
I worked for most artists, so.
Right.
So if I die young, I could, no.
Yes.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't get sad.
There you go. No. Yeah, no, that is not really my aspiration, so. Well, on that note about posthumous fame, let's wrap it up.
Good.
All right, so this has been another episode of the Storyworks Roundtable. You can find show notes and more at wordessential.com/storyworksroundtable. That's Storyworks Roundtable, all one word.